The overseer's record book lay open on the wooden desk, its pages covered with carefully organized columns of figures and identities. But on the morning of March 14th, 1851, Thomas Garrett made an entry that would disturb his sleep for years to come. In the section designated for noteworthy incidents, he wrote only 4 words that carried immense weight. Another white infant found. It marked the 7th occurrence in just 3 months. The Henderson Plantation stretched across 2,000 acres of Alabama cotton land, located 20 miles south of Montgomery. 300 souls lived and labored within its borders, most of them held in bondage, their existences measured in cotton bales picked and fields cultivated. The plantation had functioned for 4 decades without significant disruption, operating as a model of efficiency that other landowners examined and attempted to replicate. The enslaved population remained stable, the crop yields stayed consistent, the financial records balanced perfectly down to the smallest denomination, until the infants started materializing without explanation. The first child was discovered on a bitter January morning by a woman named Ruth, who resided in cabin number 12, with her husband Daniel and their 3 children. She had risen before sunrise to collect water from the well when she detected it. A thin, wavering cry emanating from the entrance of the abandoned cabin adjacent to hers. Cabin 13 had remained vacant for months, ever since its former occupants had been sold down river to settle a financial obligation Colonel Henderson had accumulated during a disappointing harvest season. Ruth found the infant wrapped in a flour sack, positioned deliberately on the deteriorating floorboards just beyond the threshold. The child appeared to be approximately 2 months old, with pale skin that seemed almost luminescent in the pre-dawn darkness and a shock of blonde hair so delicate it was nearly transparent. The baby was clean, properly nourished, and dressed in a cotton garment that, while plain, was considerably finer than anything the enslaved population would possess access to. The stitching was meticulous and uniform, the kind of craftsmanship that required both time and considerable skill. Ruth stood in the doorway for an extended moment, the freezing January wind cutting through her thin dress, staring at the infant with growing comprehension of the danger this represented. In her world, unexpected occurrences were invariably dangerous occurrences. A white baby materializing in the slave quarters represented the kind of event that could bring consequences down upon everyone, whether guilty or innocent of any wrongdoing. But she was a mother herself, and the baby was crying, and certain instincts ran deeper than the fear that governed daily existence. She gathered the child and brought it to the overseer's residence. Thomas Garrett had been managing Henderson Plantation for 12 years. He was a systematic man of 43, neither especially cruel nor particularly kind, who viewed his position as employment requiring organization and meticulous attention to detail. He had come to Alabama from Virginia, where he had learned plantation management under his father, who had operated a smaller enterprise in the Tidewater region. Garrett took pride in maintaining an orderly establishment. The enslaved population was healthy and productive by the standards of the time. The equipment was properly maintained, the financial books balanced precisely. The colonel trusted him completely, and that trust had been earned through years of consistent, reliable service. The appearance of an unexplained infant was, to his methodical mind, primarily an administrative problem requiring investigation. White babies did not simply materialize in slave quarters without explanation. Someone had to have transported it there. Someone had to possess knowledge about its origins, and it was his responsibility to determine who and what. He questioned Ruth extensively in his office, a small building adjacent to the main house that served as the operational center of plantation business. The room was sparse and functional, containing a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with ledgers documenting every aspect of the plantation's operations. Ruth stood before him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her body, her eyes fixed on the floor as she had been trained to do from childhood. Had she observed anyone near the cabins during the night hours? No, sir. Had she heard anything unusual at all? Footsteps, voices, the sound of a horse or wagon approaching? No, sir. Did she recognize the flour sack or the garment the baby was wearing? No, sir. When precisely had she found the child? Just before dawn, sir, when she went to fetch water, as she did every morning. Was there anything else unusual about the cabin or the area surrounding it? No, sir. Ruth answered each question with increasing nervousness, aware that in the world she inhabited, being the bearer of strange news could prove dangerous. She knew nothing beyond what she had already stated. She had seen nothing suspicious. She had simply found the child and done what she believed was right. Garrett believed her testimony. He had been managing enslaved workers long enough to recognize when someone was being deceptive, and Ruth's fear was genuine and uncomplicated by guilt. She was as mystified as he was by the situation. Garrett sent word to the main house where Colonel Marcus Henderson and his wife maintained their residence. The colonel was in Montgomery on business, something concerning a cotton factor's contract that required renegotiating. But Mrs. Elizabeth Henderson came down to the overseer's office within the hour of being summoned. She was a tall woman in her 50s with iron gray hair, pulled back in a severe arrangement, and sharp blue eyes that missed very little. She had been born into one of Virginia's old families, and had brought both substantial money and valuable connections to her marriage. She was known for managing the household with the same efficiency her husband applied to the agricultural operations, supervising a staff of house servants with firm but fair discipline. She examined the infant with a practiced eye, her long fingers checking the baby's limbs, looking into its mouth, feeling the texture of the garment it wore. Mrs. Henderson had raised 4 children of her own, and had overseen the births of countless enslaved infants on the plantation throughout her years there. She knew babies, and she knew quality when she encountered it. "This child has been well cared for," she said, her voice crisp and certain. "Look at the skin carefully. No rashes, no signs of neglect or poor treatment. The baby has been bathed regularly and fed properly. And this garment, this is quality cotton, and the stitching is excellent. Someone with means has been looking after this baby, someone with access to good cloth and the skill to sew it properly. But who would leave it here?" Garrett asked. "And why specifically in the slave quarters? If someone wanted to abandon a child, there are orphanages in Montgomery, churches that would accept it without question. Why bring it all the way out here and leave it in an empty cabin?" Mrs. Henderson had no immediate answer to offer. She wrapped the baby more securely in its cloth and arranged for one of the house servants to prepare a basket with necessary supplies. "I will take the child to the county orphanage myself," she said. "Mrs. Whitfield will know what to do with it. As for who left it here and why, that is a question for you and my husband to answer, Mr. Garrett. I suggest you begin investigating immediately." The matter, she assumed, was closed. An unfortunate incident certainly, but not unprecedented in the broader world. Babies were abandoned all the time for all sorts of reasons throughout the South. This one would be cared for at the orphanage and eventually placed with a family. Life would continue as normal, but 3 weeks later, it happened again. This time, the baby was found in cabin 7, discovered by a man named Joseph when he returned from the fields at dusk. Joseph was a field hand in his 30s, strong and reliable, known for his steady work and quiet demeanor among the other workers. He had been married once, but his wife had died in childbirth 5 years earlier, and he had never remarried. He lived alone in cabin 7, a small structure at the northern end of the quarters. When he pushed open his cabin door that evening, exhausted from a long day of clearing a new field for spring planting, he found a white infant lying on his sleeping pallet. Same circumstances as before, a white baby, perhaps 3 months old, wrapped in clean cloth. placed carefully as if someone had wanted to ensure it would be discovered immediately. The child was healthy, fed, and calm, its blue eyes staring up at the ceiling with the unfocused gaze of the very young. Joseph stood frozen in his doorway, his mind racing through the implications of this discovery. A white baby in his cabin. If someone accused him of stealing it, of harming it, of anything at all, he could be killed without trial. The fact that he had done nothing wrong would mean nothing if the wrong person decided to make an accusation. But he also knew that hiding the baby or trying to move it would appear even worse if discovered. He had no choice but to report it immediately to the authorities. He brought the baby to the overseer's house, his hands shaking slightly as he handed the infant to Garrett. Garrett felt the first stirrings of genuine unease settling in his chest. One abandoned baby could be explained as a desperate mother's last resort, a tragedy born of poverty or shame. Two suggested something more deliberate, more organized than simple abandonment. Someone was choosing to leave these babies specifically at Henderson Plantation, specifically in the slave quarters. But why would anyone do this? He questioned Joseph with the same thoroughness he had applied to Ruth and received substantially the same answers. Nothing seen, nothing heard during the night. The cabin had been empty when Joseph left for the fields at dawn. The baby had been there when he returned at dusk. No one else had been in the cabin during the day. Joseph was certain of that fact. He kept his few possessions in a specific arrangement, and nothing had been disturbed except for the baby's placement on his sleeping pallet. This time, Garrett conducted a more thorough investigation of the circumstances. He walked through the slave quarters that night after dark, checking for signs of unusual activity. He examined the ground around Cabin 7 for footprints or wagon tracks that might indicate how someone had approached. He questioned the other residents of the quarters systematically, asking if anyone had seen strangers on the plantation or noticed anything out of the ordinary during the day. He examined the cloth the baby had been wrapped in, looking for any identifying marks, a laundry mark, a particular weave pattern, anything that might indicate where it had come from or who had handled it. He found absolutely nothing. The cloth was good quality, but unremarkable and without distinctive features. The quarters had been quiet all day, according to all witnesses. No strangers, no unusual activity. The ground around Cabin 7 showed only the normal traffic of people going about their daily routines. The second infant joined the first at the orphanage, delivered by Mrs. Henderson with a deepening sense of concern. 2 abandoned white babies in 3 weeks, both found in the same location. It was beginning to appear less like coincidence and more like a deliberate pattern someone was following. Colonel Marcus Henderson returned from Montgomery 2 days later and was briefed on the situation by both his wife and his overseer. He was a practical man of 58 who had built his fortune through careful planning and calculated risk management. He had inherited a modest plantation from his father and had expanded it significantly through shrewd land purchases and efficient operations. He was respected in Montgomery society, served on the boards of 2 banks, and was frequently consulted by other planters on matters of agricultural technique and labor management. The appearance of unexplained white infants on his property represented both a mystery and a potential scandal. If word spread that babies were being abandoned at Henderson Plantation, it could damage his reputation and, more importantly, his business relationships. People might start asking questions. They might start wondering if there was something about his plantation that attracted such activity. They might begin to speculate about what was happening in his slave quarters that would make someone choose his property for such purposes. Double the night watch, he ordered Garrett. I want men patrolling the quarters every hour after dark. Post them at both ends of the quarters and have them walk the full length every hour. Whoever is doing this will be caught. They have to approach from somewhere, the road, the fields, the woods. Someone will see them eventually. But the night watch found nothing. The patrols observed nothing unusual. 2 men walked the quarters every hour from dusk until dawn, and they reported no unusual activity whatsoever. The quarters remained quiet, the routines undisturbed. The enslaved population went to bed at their usual times and rose at their usual times. No one came or went who should not have been there. And yet, 3 weeks after the second baby appeared, there was a third. This one was found in cabin 19, in the southern section of the quarters, farthest from the main house. A woman named Hannah discovered it when she woke to feed her own infant in the middle of the night. Hannah was 24, the mother of 3 children, married to a man named Samuel, who worked as a carpenter on the plantation. She was known as a light sleeper, made more so by years of waking to tend to babies in the night. She had heard no footsteps, no doors opening, no sounds of any kind during the night. Her husband slept beside her, snoring softly. Her 3 children were asleep on their pallets in the corner. But there, in the other corner of the cabin where there had been nothing before, was another white baby wrapped in the same type of clean cloth, wearing the same type of simple but well-made garment. Hannah's scream woke half the quarters. By the time Garrett arrived, a crowd had gathered outside cabin 19. The enslaved population was frightened now, their fear palpable in the cold March air. In their world, unexplained events were dangerous. Strange occurrences drew attention, and attention from the white overseers and owners was rarely good for anyone. Whispers spread through the crowd, whispers of haints and spirits, of curses and omens. Some of the older people remembered stories from their childhoods, tales of supernatural beings that could move unseen and leave signs of their presence. Others spoke of warnings, of messages from the dead, of punishments for unnamed sins. Garrett dispersed the crowd with sharp orders, sending people back to their cabins. He could not afford to have panic spreading through the quarters. Frightened workers were unproductive workers, and the spring planting season was approaching rapidly. He needed everyone focused on their tasks, not jumping at shadows and spreading wild stories that would disrupt operations. He took possession of the 3rd infant and brought it to his office. This time, examining the baby more carefully in the lamplight, he noticed something he had missed before. The child had a small birthmark on its left shoulder, a distinctive port wine stain in the shape of a crescent moon. It was the kind of mark a mother would recognize instantly, the kind of identifying feature that could not be hidden or disguised. He made a note of it in his ledger, adding it to the growing file on the mysterious babies. 3 infants in 2 months, all white, all healthy, all well cared for, all appearing overnight in slave cabins despite increased security measures. It was beginning to feel less like a criminal matter and more like something he could not quite name. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up when he thought about it too long. The 4th baby appeared in early March, found in cabin 23 by an elderly woman named Sarah who had lived on the plantation for 40 years. She discovered it at dawn, placed just inside her door as if someone had known she would be the first to wake. Sarah was known as a healer, someone who knew herbs and remedies, who was called upon when children fell ill or women went into difficult labor. She looked at the white baby with eyes that had seen too much suffering, wrapped it more securely, and brought it to Garrett without a word. The 5th came a week later in cabin 4, found by a young couple who had been married just 6 months. The 6th was discovered in cabin 16 by a man who worked in the stables. Each time the pattern was identical, a white infant, healthy and well cared for, appearing overnight in or near a slave cabin with no explanation provided. Each time, despite increased patrols and heightened vigilance, no one saw or heard anything suspicious. The enslaved population grew more frightened with each discovery. Work in the fields became tense. Productivity dropped noticeably, and Garrett found himself dealing with an increasingly anxious workforce. People were afraid to sleep, afraid to wake, afraid of what they might find when they opened their doors. The white overseers and drivers were equally unsettled. In a world built on control and order, the babies represented chaos, something happening that could not be explained or prevented through normal means. Garrett increased security again. He posted guards at the entrances to the quarters. He had men patrol the boundaries of the plantation. He even brought in dogs, thinking they might alert to the presence of strangers approaching, but nothing worked. The babies kept appearing, and no one could explain how it was happening. Colonel Henderson called a meeting of his senior staff in mid-March. In addition to Garrett, this included Benjamin Cross, his head driver, William Porter, his stable master, and Margaret Sullivan, his wife's personal assistant, who managed the household staff. They gathered in the colonel's study, a room lined with books and ledgers that represented 40 years of careful record-keeping. "Gentlemen and Mrs. Sullivan," the colonel said, standing behind his desk with his hands clasped behind his back. "We have a problem that defies conventional explanation. 6 white infants have appeared on this plantation over the course of 2 months. Despite our best efforts, increased patrols, guard dogs, constant vigilance, we have no idea who is leaving them or why. This situation cannot continue. It is affecting productivity, morale, and my reputation. I need solutions, not excuses. Could it be someone from outside the plantation?" Porter suggested. He was a lean man in his 40s who had worked with horses all his life. "Someone using our property as a convenient dumping ground. Maybe someone from Montgomery who knows the layout of the plantation well enough to move undetected." "The patrols would have seen them," Garrett replied. "We have men watching the roads and the boundaries constantly. No one has entered or left the plantation at night without being logged in the gate book. I have checked every entry personally. The only people coming and going are authorized. Merchants making deliveries, neighbors on social calls, all during daylight hours." "Then it must be someone inside," Cross said. He was a hard man, the head driver, responsible for managing the field workers. He had held his position for 8 years and ruled through a combination of intimidation and strategic cruelty. Someone who knows the routines and can move without being noticed. Someone who has access to the quarters. "But who?" Mrs. Sullivan asked. She was a woman in her late 30s, educated and sharp, who had been with the Henderson family for 15 years. "And more importantly, where are these babies coming from?" 6 infants do not simply appear from nowhere. Someone is giving birth to these children, and someone is caring for them before they are abandoned. That requires resources, food, cloth, time, privacy. Where is all of this happening? It was a question no one could answer with any certainty. The implications were staggering. If someone on the plantation was hiding multiple babies, they would need a secure location, supplies, and help from others. It could not be done alone, but if multiple people were involved, how had they kept it secret? How had no one noticed anything unusual? "There is another possibility," Mrs. Sullivan said quietly. "What if the babies are not being hidden on the plantation at all? What if they are being brought here from somewhere else? Somewhere close enough that the person can make the trip in a few hours, but far enough away that we would not think to look there." "You mean Montgomery?" the colonel asked. "Or one of the neighboring plantations, or a house in the countryside somewhere within a few hours' ride." The colonel considered this carefully. That would require someone with access to transportation, a horse or wagon, someone who could leave their location at night and return before dawn without being missed. "Or someone who has a legitimate reason to travel," Garrett added. "A merchant, a doctor, a minister, someone whose comings and goings would not be questioned by anyone." The meeting continued for another hour, but produced no concrete answers to the mystery. The colonel made a decision. "We will conduct a census. Every person on this plantation will be accounted for and examined. If there are women who have recently given birth, we will know about it. If there are supplies being diverted, we will find them. If there are hidden spaces where babies could be kept, We will discover them. This mystery will be solved. The census began the next day. It was a massive undertaking. 300 people to be documented, questioned, and in the case of women of childbearing age, physically examined by Mrs. Henderson and Dr. Robert Chambers, the plantation's physician. Dr. Chambers was a man in his 60s who had been treating the Henderson family and their enslaved population for 20 years. He was thorough and professional, but the examinations were deeply invasive and humiliating for the women subjected to them. The process took nearly 2 weeks and was deeply unpopular among everyone involved. The enslaved population resented the intrusion, the questions, the physical examinations. The fear that had been building since the first baby appeared now mixed with anger and resentment at the violation. Garrett could feel the tension in the quarters, could see it in the way people avoided eye contact and spoke in whispers when the overseers passed by. The results of the census were baffling. Every woman who had given birth in the past year was accounted for, and their children matched the expected descriptions. There were no hidden pregnancies, no unexplained absences that would suggest a woman had given birth in secret. The supplies were all accounted for: the cloth, the thread, the food stores. Nothing was missing that could not be explained by normal usage patterns. The cabins were searched thoroughly, the outbuildings examined. Even the woods around the plantation were combed for signs of hidden structures or caches of supplies. Nothing. They found absolutely nothing that explained the appearances. And yet, on the night the census was completed, an 8th baby appeared. This one was found in cabin 9, discovered by a young woman named Clara, who had been living alone since her mother's death the previous fall. Clara was 17, quiet and withdrawn, known for keeping to herself among the other enslaved people. She worked in the main house as a laundry maid, one of the few enslaved people who had regular access to the household's inner workings. She was small and thin with large, dark eyes that seemed to see more than she should. When she found the baby in her cabin that morning, she did not scream or raise an alarm immediately. Instead, she picked up the child, wrapped it more securely in its cloth, and sat with it until morning came, rocking it gently and humming a tune her mother had taught her years ago. When Garrett came to collect the infant, alerted by one of the other residents who had seen Clara sitting in her doorway with a white baby, he found her still rocking the child. There was something in her expression that made him pause. Something that went beyond the fear and confusion he had seen in the others who had found babies. This was different. This was a deep, profound sadness, as if Clara understood something the rest of them did not. "Did you see who left this child?" he asked, his voice gentler than usual. Clara shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving the baby's face. "Did you hear anything during the night? Any sounds at all?" Another shake of the head. "Clara, I need you to tell me if you know anything about these babies, anything at all. You will not be punished for telling the truth, but I need to know what is happening here." Clara looked up at him then, and Garrett saw tears streaming down her face. "They are lost," she whispered. "All of them. They are lost, and someone is trying to save them." "Save them from what?" Garrett asked. But Clara would not say anything more. She handed over the baby and retreated into her cabin, closing the door behind her. Garrett stood outside for a moment, disturbed by the encounter. There had been something in Clara's voice, something that suggested she knew more than she was saying. But he could not force her to talk, not without risking making the situation worse. He reported the conversation to Colonel Henderson, who ordered Clara brought to the main house for questioning. But when Cross, the head driver, went to fetch her an hour later, he found cabin 9 empty. Clara had vanished, taking nothing with her but the clothes on her back. A search party was organized immediately. In the world of 1851, Alabama, an enslaved person disappearing was a serious matter, not just for the financial loss, but for what it represented. If Clara had run, others might follow her example. If she had been taken by someone, there were implications about security that could not be ignored. And if she had simply hidden somewhere on the plantation, she needed to be found before she starved or came to harm. They found her 3 hours later hiding in the old tobacco barn on the eastern edge of the property. The barn had not been used in years, not since the colonel had shifted entirely to cotton production in the 1840s. It was a large decaying structure with a collapsed roof and walls that let in the wind. Clara was huddled in a corner, shivering from cold and fear. Cross dragged her out roughly, but Garrett intervened. Carefully, he said, "The colonel wants to question her, and he cannot do that if she is injured or too frightened to speak coherently." They brought Clara to the main house, to the colonel's study, where Henderson, his wife, and Garrett waited. Clara stood before them, thin and trembling, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked even smaller in the grand room, surrounded by books and furniture that represented wealth beyond anything she would ever know. Colonel Henderson studied her for a long moment before speaking. When he did, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Clara, I am not going to hurt you. I am not going to punish you for running. I just need you to tell me the truth. Do you know where these babies are coming from?" "No, sir." "Do you know who has been leaving them here?" "No, sir, but you said something to Mr. Garrett. You said they were lost and someone was trying to save them." "What did you mean by that?" Clara was silent for a long moment, her thin shoulders hunched as if she were trying to make herself disappear entirely. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "My mama used to tell me stories about the old days before she came here. She said there were places where babies were not wanted, where they were born and then given away, hidden, made to disappear." "What kind of places, Mrs.?" Henderson asked, leaning forward in her chair. "Big houses, rich houses, places where a baby being born at the wrong time or to the wrong person would cause shame," she said. "Sometimes the babies would just vanish, and no one would ask questions because asking questions was dangerous." "And what happened to these babies?" the colonel asked. "Sometimes they died. Sometimes they were sold. Sometimes they were given to people who would take them far away where no one would ever know where they came from." Clara's voice grew even quieter. "Mama said it was one of the secret things. One of the things everyone knew about, but no one talked about. She said the big houses had lots of secrets, and the babies were just one of them." The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Colonel Henderson exchanged a long look with his wife, and Garrett saw something pass between them. A recognition, perhaps, or a shared understanding of something he was not privy to. "Are you suggesting," Henderson said slowly, "that these infants are being abandoned here because someone wants to hide their existence? That they are illegitimate children from wealthy families?" "I do not know, sir. I am just telling you what my mama told me. That sometimes when people have secrets they cannot keep, they find places to hide them, places where no one will ask questions, places where the babies might be found and cared for, but where the scandal would be contained." It was a theory that made a terrible kind of sense. The Henderson plantation was isolated enough to be discreet, but established enough to have connections to Montgomery society. The colonel and his wife attended social functions, did business with the city's prominent families, moved in circles where reputation was everything. If someone in that world needed to dispose of an inconvenient infant, the product of an affair perhaps, or a pregnancy that would ruin a reputation, the plantation's slave quarters would be an ideal location. The babies would be found and cared for, but the scandal would be contained within the enslaved population. The white families of Montgomery would never need to know that their peers had produced illegitimate children. But it was just a theory. There was no proof, no evidence beyond the babies themselves and Clara's second-hand stories from a mother who was now dead. Colonel Henderson sent Clara back to the quarters with a warning to keep her speculations to herself and to never run again. Then he sat in silence for a long time, staring at the ledgers on his desk. Finally, he looked at Garrett. "I am going to Montgomery," he said. "I am going to speak with Sheriff Crane. This has gone beyond a plantation matter. If what Clara suggests is true, if someone in Montgomery society is using my property for such purposes, then the law needs to be involved." He left that afternoon, riding hard for the city. Garrett watched him go, then returned to his office and made another entry in his ledger. 8 babies in 10 weeks and still no answers. But that night something changed. The 9th baby appeared, but this time there was a witness. A young man named Marcus, who worked as a stable hand, had been unable to sleep that night. He had been feeling ill all day, a stomach ailment that kept him awake and uncomfortable. Around midnight, he had left his cabin to relieve himself in the woods behind the quarters. As he was returning, he saw something that made him freeze in his tracks. A figure was moving through the quarters, carrying something wrapped in cloth. The figure was dressed in dark clothing and moved with purpose, heading toward cabin 12, the same cabin where the first baby had been found months earlier. Marcus watched as the figure approached the cabin, paused at the door, and then placed the bundle inside. Then the figure turned and walked quickly back the way it had come, heading not toward the road or the woods, but toward the main house. Marcus waited until the figure was out of sight, then ran to cabin 12. Inside, he found the 9th baby wrapped in the now familiar clean cloth. He immediately went to wake Garrett. By the time Garrett arrived, Marcus was agitated and frightened, speaking quickly and stumbling over his words. But his story was clear. He had seen someone leave the baby, someone who had come from the direction of the main house and returned there after placing the infant. Garrett felt his blood run cold. The main house. Not an outsider, not someone from Montgomery, someone who lived on the plantation, someone with access to the main house, someone who could move through the quarters without raising suspicion because they belonged there. He questioned Marcus extensively, trying to get more details. Had Marcus seen the person's face? No, it was too dark, and they had been wearing a hood or bonnet. Could he tell if it was a man or woman? He thought it was a woman based on the way she moved, but he could not be certain. How tall was the person? Average height, not particularly tall or short. Was there anything distinctive about their clothing or the way they walked? Nothing he could identify with certainty. If you're finding this account as disturbing and perplexing as we have, subscribe to my channel and hit that like button. Share this story with someone who appreciates history's hidden mysteries. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from right now.